Hi there, my name is Alex and thank you for watching the final render of my Caspar project. I will now go over the creating process and how I managed my creations and all the other stuff I did along the way as well. So initially I came with the planning phase. I decided exactly what I wanted to do, which I chucked around a bunch of different ideas to begin with. The first and one I ended up sticking with was my fantasy idea, but it did go through a couple of different iterations. So over here, I had a little document lined out here, just kind of getting down the what I must have and what needs to be done and ideas. So the must-haves I knew I needed to do is I needed to create a character with details, a detailed environment fitting to a specific theme of my choosing, along with rigging animation, as well as some well lit scene and lighting in the Unreal Engine. That was the engine I decided to use, as I believed it was overall help me make a better product for a beginner who has never done anything to the extent that I did for this project. Where I'd never made a character before, I'd never created an environment before, I'd never done animation or mocap data, I'd had little to do with lighting before, so I believed Unreal would be my best effort to really get across what I could do, and it'd be the most helpful for me to learn from the basis. So my original idea, which you can see here, is my fantasy world. The original idea consisted of the main character being a human lizard / dragon hybrid, which would allow me to have a mixture of modelling and texturing to make it look more dragonic, or scaly is another word for things like scales, horns, claws, potentially tail, stuff like that. The environment I had in my mind was for a stone castle / city courtyard area or grounds, with the character either very shyly and scared walking into the city, or alternatively being forced out of the city, with reminiscence and making comparisons to the Game of Thrones scene where Cersei's had the big shame walk, which, if you know, it was a big part of it. It was a very iconic scene. Taking inspiration from that was for the potentially being forced out. However, towards the end of the animation, an event happens, causing a massive explosion of fire and burning everything around the character. As the idea was that my character had been cursed by a dragon, demon, fantasy creature, and he had no control over his abilities, making him more dragonic as it went on, and causing these outbursts of fire that he has no control over, massacring and genociding this entire city, making everything go up in flames. Charming, I know. Alternatively, as I worked more with this idea, I came to the realization after reading the briefing and discussing with my lecturers that I couldn't do that idea, as the main briefing design that we had to create a single character due to the limits of the project, as well as timing constraints and just our overall personal abilities. So in order to create that original idea, I would have to make at least 10 different or unique-ish characters, even if it were just simply changing the textures for skin tones or slightly increasing and decreasing the height of the models. It would be a lot of extra work, which I just did not know if I'd be able to do in the time frame that we have been given for this project. So that idea was slightly, not scrapped, but tweaked into my 1.5 idea, which was a very similar size, a fantasy world with a human dragon hybrid, being able to give me a mixture of everything. At this stage, I was unsure about whether or not I would create a tail for my character, as I needed to look more into the ins and outs of the animating and how adding a tail would affect the overall skeleton bone making and skin weighting of the character. Would adding an extra limb, essentially, as the tail would that jeopardize the rest of the skeleton and rest of the animations? If it would, I would not be able to do that idea, as I wouldn't want to compromise everything. As you've seen in the final print, I was able to find a way around that, and we'll get to that slightly later. The city and the environment was the same idea. However, instead of them walking into the city or being banished out, this character that I would name as Psycho was very psychotic, as the name went. He was very different in nature, as he had just gone walking out. He would be walking out of the city after killing the entire population, complete genocide of the city, which deals with my problem of no secondary characters, and it would also mean I would put a lot of blood on the character's sword, because I wanted to create some sort of assets for this project. And at the same time, after you walked out of the village, out of the city, the main gates, all of that, it would zoom in onto the face of the character to make a grin, like a kind of smug face, if you will, before moving back for him to snap his fingers, and the entire city going up in an inferno. I really like the idea of creating an inferno or fire. Give me a chance to use particle effects in Unreal, which is something I haven't had the chance to work with, and really get to expand on that knowledge. It helped me improve what I can do. And yeah, so that was the idea I ended up going with. However, it wasn't the only one. I spun around the idea of potentially a sci-fi idea, but the more I looked into it, the more I was realising I was just recreating scenes from Star Wars movies or video games, or taking leaps from Cyberpunk 2077, as that had just recently come out or came across my radar. So I was realising more and more that when I was looking into those ideas, I wasn't going to be creating anything new. I was just going to be taking what had already been made and trying to put my own twist onto it, and I didn't think that would be the best show of my ability, so I ended up scrapping those ideas and going with my 1.5 idea of my fantasy idea, of which, if I go over to here, we can see my presentation. So I had a lot of ideas, a lot of referencing for my mood board. All of my pictures I've taken from somewhere. The majority of them are from Pinterest. On each and every one, I have a link to the original artwork, so you can go find the original artist and original inspiration for it. You can see where I was going with it. So for the fantasy idea, I was very keen on like a Skyrim fantasy, Dungeons and Dragons, medieval kind of setting and vibe. So I used lots of referencing for it. The human dragon hybrid, I took a lot of inspiration from this blue dragon original art I found on Pinterest, as well as some fan art of a anime character I'm quite fond of called Natsu Dragneel from Fairy Tail. Along with that, I also looked into kind of surrounding area and environments. You quite often find castles, both real castles and fake towns and castle cities. So lots of forests, lots of trees, lots of green surrounding it with large stone structures to it. There's also I looked into kind of like finding unique patterns that I could use for scales for my character as well. I also took big inspiration from my environment from an old video game called Fable 2, where I've linked a YouTube video of someone playing it, one of my favourite creators, and they've gone through just from, you can see this from this little screenshot I've taken here, kind of like what I envisioned the a fantasy town looking like, the courtyard area of a castle, of the city, of a town, stuff like that. You can see that the flooring of the tiling is all repetitive, all nice tiles, being able to use them. The same with lots of stones, lots of wooden houses with kind of like from medieval and Tudor times, with lots of wood on the outside and stones and like mud and clay buildings all holding it together, which was really useful, so I can kind of get an idea of a lot of textures to look into making and assets to create later on down the line. And seeing these images here, this was really what I was going for from the Fiery Inferno. I found these amazing artworks. Let's go around and you can just see, if I come out here, you can see these ones were, a lot of these were from art stations, just really helping me kind of gather what I wanted, like kind of like the bottom one here, like a before and after really, of like what the town looked like as it was before, all lively, full of life, tons of people out, and then it becoming a tragedy afterwards, being surrounded by fire, burning, smoke everywhere, ashes from where people used to be. And I really like the impact of the two pictures up here, really showing like the moment of impact, like when the snap goes off, when the fire starts, really giving you a feel of what the impact of it is. And I also have some more ideas of what a building would look like there. You see the quite similarly layered, very similarly built, same materials, just with different tones of texturing to it, which is something, so I know that I might be able to create the same asset and reuse it multiple times, just with little tweaks here and there, which will save me a lot of time in the creation process. I also looked into some artwork here, looking at kind of like teeth designs and I could potentially use for inspiration for my smug character, as well as looking at like a D&D fantasy town layout, so I can kind of get a a bird's eye view of what a town layout could look like, what I should consider implementing, what I should be leaving out. You see, they've got lots of walls around it, guard posts scattered about, as well as buildings both large and small and curving around with stairs scattered about it and stuff like that. I then, from this original idea, I then wanted to have a little go at creating some concept for it. So I went on to a website called Hero Forge, so I was able to create a D&D style character to really give myself some ideas of potentially what my character could look like, what body proportions, what a tail could look like to it, how to mix the human and dragon elements of the character into one while still not getting in the way of it. On top of this, I also then went on to draw a bit of concept art, which is on this one here. It wasn't anything fantastic, anything as traditional drawing is not my strongest suit, but it was able to help gather the initial ideas of it, of mixing together a standard human looking body, but on the limbs, on his arms, his feet, his head, on his body being covered in dragon scales. So I mean, really getting a repetitive pattern that shows almost acting like an armor to the body itself, an extra skin, like a shell on top of the human himself. And I also like the idea of tweaking with maybe potentially having different eye colours to really show the impact of what Psycho could end up being. So it's just helped me get an idea, and also getting proportions in, and potentially how long a tail should be, as well as what some primary colours for the character would be as well. From there, I then looked into the houses. Again, showing my referencing from it here as well. One of the main things I wanted going into this was the buildings to be very simple. I didn't want it to be massive, extravagant buildings, as I realised that was going to take more time, and I was going to struggle more with making them high detailed like these ones on the left here, whilst the ones on the right with them being very simple, simplistic buildings, very using 2-3 materials in total, adding very simple elements to it, like you see on top, the little wooden structures on the outside, or just being plain stone buildings with shacks on top. It was really helping me simplify down and getting what was ideal about the entire scenario. I also looked into not just what was been done by artists, but what was historically accurate. So I looked onto the English Heritage site to see what buildings were used and made of in Tudor times, being able to look at and reference what was realistically used at the time and how I could use that to my advantage, and trying to make these as accurate, but still give them my own accurate to real life, but still giving them my own personal twist, if you will, on what they could potentially be. As well as looking at some examples for... This was very helpful after being able to speak to a environment artist from Rebellion Games, getting an idea on what to do, how to make an entire city environment without making it seem repetitive, without having to create 20 different houses. A great thing that she taught me was that a lot of environments use the same assets over, just used differently. So these two pictures in front are actually the same building. Just on the top, they've literally taken the original building, moved it up, and rotated it 180 degrees, so you can't see the front face of the house, but you can still see. But it's still the exact same building, just put on top to give the illusion of it being a different type of housing, which is really useful and really beneficial for me. So it helped give me an idea and inspiration on how I can only have to create a certain amount of assets for the house, and I'll be able to just reuse them to recreate different buildings to make it so that it doesn't look like the town or city is completely the same building. It really helped me focus in on how to create an environment without having to spend the entire time only making the environment. Also got a bit more concept art of what a city could look like, as well as some ideas for textures. So these pictures up here are ones I took myself when I went on a trip to to Canterbury. So these gave me inspiration on what I kind of wanted the ground to look like, as well as kind of how I could implement these rough stone patterns in a repetitive cycle without it being the same pattern over and over again. After deciding on exactly what I was going to do for my final project, and after doing a bit of planning for my mood boards, some concept art for my character, for the environment, and a couple other little bits and bobs, it was then time to start coming into implementing it all. And right off the bat, I made a few little mistakes here and there. One of the first ones I made was with my block out here. So there's nothing initially wrong with the actual block out. You can see I started it here with creating it all as one single object. I realised that was a certain mistake. I couldn't go into more detail into selecting certain aspects of it, so I simply separate it up into smaller objects to work with. But one of the main issues I had with it was the software I was using. I had decided to create my block out in 3ds Max, as it was the software I was more comfortable with using. I had used it for much longer and I knew it a bit better than the other alternatives, so I started creating my block out in 3ds Max, but soon realised that whilst Max is perfect for making small models or just making a simple 3D model before and nothing else, it is actually hasn't got as many resources to it for further in the creation process. So whilst it can make very good low poly models and even some high poly models if you put in the effort, it doesn't have a lot more resources you can use for things like animation or rigging. It doesn't. The skeletons, creating the bone structures and skeletons you can use in Max are not that high level or aren't that as much well done. So I quickly realised that I would be hindering myself by continuing to use Max. So I quickly, after I finished creating my block out model here, which is this is it towards the end of its development, I had decided to go with the tail in the end, as I looked into the research for the tail as mentioned in my planning stage, and realised it wasn't going to be a big problem to create an extra bone for my skeleton to implement a tail into the scene. So I decided to go with the tail, and it gives the characters something a bit more to himself, something a bit more for Psycho other than dragon scales, horns, etc. So once I had done creating my block out here in 3ds Max, I then transferred and exported the file into a Maya file. So there's a really good extension tool you can use here in Max in the types of exporting sections, where you can actually export the entire project and its entirety with all of its assets and all of its information into, instead of it being a FBX file, it'll transfer into being a Maya file instead, taking over all of the extras and everything else you would need for said character, and being able to continue it on in Maya instead of 3ds Max. So I did that after creating the block out, so that I could then, after the following stage, implement everything from, instead of it being just have to Max and have to move things around to try and make it work in Max, I was able just to immediately import it all into Maya and continue working on the character in Maya after I would do the soft surface modelling in ZBrush. Now I apologise for the video you're about to see. It was taken on a less than perfect computer, as I do not have access to ZBrush on my own computer at home. So with ZBrush, I ran into a number of different issues when I was implementing it, mainly due to the fact that I had never used the software before. So I had zero knowledge of what I was doing and was basically learning by trying out. So monkey see, monkey do, monkey try, monkey fail, monkey try again. The way I was able to solve a lot of the issues I have was simply with trial and error of seeing if a certain type of brush or different movement tool would work, and if it didn't, simply going back and trying a different one. So I found out quite early on that some parts of my blockout was a bit too low poly, so it was hindering the ability to actually smooth it out and make it seem more human, seem more high detail. But from that, I was just able to use standard brush tool to add some more layer to it, to use the move tool to extend out and adjust the polygons so that they would have more of a natural curvature to them. And from there I was able to really just add more detail to it. So you can see one of the issues I had initially was that when I had blocked out my character is I hadn't accounted for, well, what's he going to be wearing? What's he going to look like? I hadn't thought of that. It wasn't on my radar at the time. So I originally, you saw on the original block out, he was all just one square boy. So I had to really go in and adjust that, and one of the ways I did that was using the masking tool in ZBrush. I was able to mask over the initial body of the character and basically separate it from the rest of the upper body, so separate it from the arms, its hands, the neck, everything, and basically extend it outwards to give it more volume, more depth, more thickness, as you will, and able to basically turn what would have just been the character's normal chest, and stomach, and turn it into a shirt, where I was able to then create some general sleeves for it on the edge of the shirt. You can see on the screen here, and really give it some volume, give it a bit of give it a bit of movement, a bit of inconsistency as it would rest on a normal person, to give the illusion of it actually, instead of it being just the original chest extended out, give it the look of an actual t-shirt, which was really helpful. And one of the things with it though is it did add me needing to add another subtool into the development in ZBrush, which adds to the poly count, which is something I have to keep an eye on, but nothing that I won't be able to adjust with later on down the line. Was it the most, apologise for the car, was it the most optimal solution? Not ideally, however, it was out of the solutions I could think of at the time, it was the best one I had. Going back now, I would probably just add an extra layer in my original block out over the chest and lower body as well, just to initially make it appear more natural, instead of having to try and jury rig some movements in ZBrush to make it work. However, with the it was a very optimal one to solve. From there, I then started working on the rest of the body. So as mentioned, as we saw in the earlier version of my block out and in ZBrush, the bottom half of the body was very low poly, to the extent that I couldn't really do anything with it. But you can see here I've been able to extend it out, give it more form using the standard and some blow up tools, and be able to give it some thickness, as well as really implement more, make it seem more natural, more overall, and as well as moving with the head, as I didn't really implement a proper neck before, so able to then add more to it and actually make it a proper neck, a bit more thickness to it, which I then later on go into more detail on and make it seem much more natural, as well as just overall masking separate objects. So as with the problem with this shirt earlier, I hadn't thought of any lower parts of the body, so I then did a similar thing of use the mask tool in ZBrush to only select a certain amount of the legs, and again extend it out, create a different append to it, and a different subtool, and create its own separate thing, so I could then put it back on top of the model, delete the original part of the model, the subtool in ZBrush, and add it on. And again, similar to what I did with the shirt, add a bit of volume, a bit of play with the material, and again it increased more to the original poly count, but it's not to a level that would affect me, and it would actually help me later on with reaching my sub count goal and in making sure the model is as optimal as possible. Later on, as you can see here, I started adding more depth into it, adding muscle detail, adding elbow structures, neat joints being put in as well. One of the other issues I came across in ZBrush was something I got noticed from my peer review later on, which I'll get into more detail, was my character's actual height didn't match up in proper proportion. So the top half of the body was fine, but the lower half was a bit too short. It looked like he was a grown man's top half of the body with a child's lower half. So I was able to use the tools you've just seen here to basically just extend the length of the feet, make the legs longer, move down the feet and make them spread apart wider to really make sure they were in line properly before merging them all together, so that they would all become one single object, and using the smooth tool to smooth over the some of the connecting parts so that it wouldn't look like they had just been glued together, like they were more naturally modelled. And on to the next part here, which was the trying to figure out how to create natural horns. I had struggled with similar with my ears earlier on, and that I didn't know how to get the a natural look to them without them looking like it was been hard surface modelled. However, I was able to use some tools called some snake tools in ZBrush here, as well as the moving tool to snake hooks and snake curves, to make them look more natural and bend them in a way that would appear as if they were general bones moving with the natural shape of the head. The main way I was able to really help deal with all the issues I had in ZBrush, from finding out what tools were to use to how to merge different objects together and smooth them out into groups properly, was I mainly made my headway thanks to taking some extra classes in ZBrush Club, as it was called in university, and they were really able to help me put me in the right direction of what kind of skills and tools I was needing to do and what to look for and how to implement them. And from there I was able to then export it out from ZBrush finally into Maya, thanks to the work I had previously done being able to import this safely. And from here I am able to start my retopology. So the retopology is where I spent the majority of my time on this module after ZBrush, as it just takes a very extensive time to go around selecting each different section and making sure that it all adds up properly. However, from here I was able to really get an idea on how my character was going to look, as well as finding out later on in development that there was ways to extend entire sections all at once and move forward from there. One issue I did come across, which you've just seen here, was where I had multiple different sections of my on the model from ZBrush, where I'd just appended them together and hadn't deleted hidden areas. They were quite often when quad drawing for the retopology, they were getting stuck on different parts of it. So you can see on the neck here, instead of it being following the main neck structure here, it's gone connected to the base here, which results in me having to go around manually by hand and take each individual polygon and stretch them out so that they connect to the right section, which would be fine on a smaller bit, but when I'm working on such a large character like this, it becomes quite quickly becomes very tedious and time consuming, which put me quite a bit behind schedule, having to go around every single bit I did and basically go around reconnecting it. Another issue I discovered relatively early on was that where I had worked on the topology, the object in ZBrush, parts of it were no longer had no longer had a line of symmetry, where I had forgot to turn it on at parts, or where I was having to get a certain aspect done really tightly. The symmetry had not carried over to the other side, meaning that after a while I was not able to simply turn on my symmetry tool and work on it all in one go, as for example, the right arm here was not the exact same as the left arm. Even though it was such a small detail you couldn't really tell to the naked eye, it made my timings have to be considerably longer in development. You can see right here, in fact, the foot is slightly off from where I had moved things around and adjusting them to be longer. I hadn't got the exact length exactly right, so I was having to spend time with this. And not only the best solution I was able to find with this was simply cutting the character in half, which was not a terribly difficult thing to do. So I simply went into the retopology I had done so far and simply cut it straight down in the middle here. See, and then I finished, and then would continue to work on this half of the model. So forgetting about the character's left-hand side, my right, and just focus on working on this side, finishing this side up, getting it as detailed as possible, making sure I covered as much as I could, and then simply mirroring it across to the other side of the body and making adjustments to it there as needed, which it did save me time in some aspects being able to do it this way. However, it did mean that later on down the line I had to go back and do, as mentioned, some work on just making sure that the the retopology quadrals covered the right aspects of the body. As I was coming to the end of the retopology, I quickly realised not so quickly, realised another issue I had, which was actually the amount of polygons I had on my thing, where I had worked hard on making sure that the curvature was right for areas such as the armpits and the shoulder bending, so that the animations would move smoothly as I got to them. I realised I'd made a mistake with how the actual flow and curvature of the retopology went. So you can see up here it was all nice and straightforward, but as these went further down, they became more and more small and minute, which caused to overlapping areas like this section here, where I was going from these areas which had multiple big sections and turning them into areas that had a lot more smaller sections. There was an overlap which was causing irregularities further down here. So you can see up here you have this one bit here that works perfectly well up to here, and then suddenly it jolts out to this to a mess here. And this caused quite a headache in the development of the retopology, as I was having to constantly work around these small issues and make sure that they were all smoothly and in place correctly. I was able to find some solutions by the end by simply going back around here and straight up deleting different sections. After the retopology was done, I then went on to do my UV unwrapping and texturing, which had a few issues with getting everything aligned up properly, as unwrapping is not one of my strongest suits. However, it was a quick fix with simply looking at some tutorial videos and then getting everything into Substance Painter and texturing it. I do not have Substance Painter on my home computer, so I can't show you the actual software. However, I do have all of the textures on file. One of the main things with the texturing was I got up the images and everything and got everything rendered properly, as well as being able to convert the texture so that I would be able to work in Substance Painter on the low poly retopology. However, all the textures would apply to the high poly version instead. One thing that was given feedback to me was when I had originally made the textures was that I'd made the scales too shiny. They didn't have enough roughness, enough realism to them. So I was told to go look at real life examples and did so. So I went and looked at the scales of animals like the Komodo dragon to see how they look compared to what mine was, and used the general skin and roughness as a base plate as an example to start working on and adding to them. The other thing I did was being able to add, change the underlying colour of the textures below, so it actually started to look like it wasn't just scales on you. This is a good example on the face one here. Originally, it was all so it was all quite like a dark red colour underneath the skin, underneath the scale, sorry, and it wasn't working. It didn't look natural. It looked quite weird. And I was able to adjust the go into settings and adjust them to make them look like, so it would appear almost like skin was underneath it. So instead of it being like a dark reddish hue or another tone of blue, I was able to adjust it so it almost looked like it was skin, almost as if the dragon scales had come out of Psycho's own skin and become a protective shell around it, hardening over time and becoming thicker, more consistent, which was actually a really good way of presenting how everything looked like in the end. From here, I then was able to export out all the textures so that they would be ready for later on in the projects, and then go on to doing the skeleton and the animation. So the skeleton was imported from Unreal Engine, but it did have a couple issues with some things and led to me having to make some big sacrifices in it. So as I was going through and building the skeleton and making sure it was connected to the right sections, I then found out much later on, as this was the fourth it's integrated save, it wasn't until I got to about the 25th, when I was fully into the skin weighting process, that I had forgotten to attach the eyes to the model. So you can see on the actual skeleton here that everything's connected, but there's no connection to the eye. So that led me to having to make a decision. I could either reattach the eyes and try and make it so normal. However, that would lead to me having to completely lose all of my skin weighting already. So I had to make a decision, and I decided that I would not incorporate the eyes into the model, as it would set me back too long of a time that I had left, and it would risk me running over and not being able to actually create anything meaningful, anything of a high enough quality to do it. So it is something that you would have noticed in the final in the final movie, and it was a decision I didn't take lightheartedly, but I couldn't see a workaround where I was able to keep the skin weighting as I had already made, and add the eyes to the scene without having to do multiple different edits and small cuts throughout the scene, which would just make the original cameras look very jarring, very unnatural, very poor quality. Or I could simply remove the eyes from the scene and continue on with the work and being able to enjoy the animation to the best of its quality. So that was a decision I had to make. As I found out later, there were better solutions of being able to basically hold the saved data of the skeleton and then be able to add a sub-level to the skeleton that would act secondary. So I'd be able to add the eyes to the skeletal mesh and to be able to hold the skin weight. However, the way to do that was very technical, and with the time frame I had left to work on, I was not confident I could get it all to work to the best of my ability and still be able to produce a high quality character by the end of it. So I made the decision to forego my character having eyes and the dual different colour eye idea to make sure that I had something that was presentable for a final project. From there, I started just really working on the skin weighting, as mentioned before, and making sure it was all clean cut. I noticed later on in the animation that there were some things that I'd missed, as I hadn't really done a lot of work on the actual movement of the head. So it was finding out that certain parts of it were getting stuck and not moving properly in the Unreal Editor. So it's something I'll have to look out for next time in my work. But from here, I simply finished creating the skin weighting, making sure it was all working perfectly as intended. So you can give you a little wave now as well. Hello. And from there, I had to go and do my animation retargeting. This led to me taking everything into Motion Builder and Mobu. So as when I originally got the Caspar files, I realised that all of my sword animations that I'd done in my motion capture hadn't been brought over with the files. It was only the original data of the skeleton of the actual character mesh. So with the help of the team at the mocap unit, I went back up in my own time and redid the Mobu in the Motion Builder and Shogun Post. So I was able to incorporate the sword positions and data and re-export it all out. It was a bit time consuming and made the animation files a bit larger, but it wasn't anything that was going to affect the overall state of the animation. And from there, I went into Motion Builder, as you're seeing in the background here, and started by reincorporating everything. So this was the moment I actually found out about the issue I had with the mesh, that when I tried to implement the eyes to the skeleton without redoing the skin weighting, it was completely deleting the skin weighting in its entirety, so the actual skeleton and the model had separated. So this was a decision when I had to decide to scrap the eyes so that the rest of the skeleton would move accordingly and be able to continue with the project. From there, the rest of the motion builder for the character went quite smoothly. It was as simple as just re-importing the character as it was once more, so it was all in consistency, as well as just adding a few more nulls in and resetting everything. And from there, it was a matter of connecting all the arms and ligaments so that they were, or limbs, so they were in the right position, which is where we found out that the general shape of where I'd made the hands more draconic, more claw-like, and given them a natural curve, as that is how my hands naturally rest. And because of using my own hands to reference, it was actually made it so that the fingers were not aligned with the actual model. So because of that, I found the hand animations were going to be slightly jarring and incomplete, as you've seen with the snap section of the animation. The wrist is moving about, the hands and wrists moving about 3 different directions, and that was after spending multiple hours honing it and making it as neatly as possible. But that was the best I could do with the time frame available to me. From here, however, the rest of the model went quite smoothly, of simply connecting the right joints to the right sections in Motion Builder. And then from there, it was a simple matter of making sure everything in the spine and head was connected properly, disconnecting bits that were missing. From there, we were able to continue the animations and get everything sorted properly. Another big issue I ran into with creating my assets for Caspar here, so things like my sword and the buildings, is that I kept running into the same problem that kept constantly reappearing. This one here, I had the issue of non-manifold geometry kept appearing. So I would create an entire model here. You can see this is a jumbled up file of my sword, and the whole model would come along with no problems whatsoever. But then when it came to actually unwrapping certain parts of it, I kept getting the same error appearing. So even though that I had completely done the UV shelling for it, everything was it came up as normal. There was no general issues with the model at all. I put in my seams and cuts and everything, but when I went to actually come and unwrap it, I would get warnings about non-manifold geometry. And despite the fact of going in and looking at the geometry itself, I couldn't actually find a way to find exactly where the problems with the geometry was. It wasn't appearing on the thing, and when they did appear on which vertexes it was and which faces, and I went and delete them and realigned everything, it was still coming up with issues. However, I was being able to identify that it wasn't the entire model that was having issues, it was only certain parts of it. So example here, so it was the hilt of the sword blade, of the sword's handle, which was causing issues, as well as certain parts of the actual sword's guard of the sword. So I was able to detach certain parts of it and able to unwrap the rest of the object with no problems, and then go back and redo certain parts of the sword, which was able to help me cut down the amount of time it would have taken me if I had to completely redo the entire object itself. So I was able to simply detach a certain aspect of the weapon, so as I said, like the end hilt guard here, or the potential top guard, cross guard stance on the end of the blade, and was able to simply unwrap those sections of the sword there without causing any more problems to the rest of the model. The final major issue I came across in creating a Caspar, I came across many little ones, but nothing was too difficult, was my some issues with Unreal. After I had finished everything, I'd redone all the mockup data and everything was finally ready to be moved into Unreal Engine, I came across the issue of finding a good way to manipulate the camera to get the shots I wanted. Now, I started with originally just putting a bunch of different cameras in the scene and moving them along the sequencer list with keyframes for the move, but none of them was natural enough. They were all very jarry, very janky, very like cut and paste, and it just didn't give off the right kind of feel I wanted for my project. It didn't give me the right kind of consistency I needed in the level of the frame. That's when I found this new thing that's just been added into Unreal as of 5.3, which is the camera rail rig and the height rig, or the crane rig I should say. This was fantastic, as it has allowed me to create a set track in Unreal that the camera will follow as the scene plays out, allowing me to get the shots I require, as well as being able to get a steady amount of elevation as if I was actually on a real life movie set doing it all myself. So as the animation goes through, you can literally see as the camera moves with the character, keeping it on the tracks, giving me the right angles I wanted for the scene, as well as being able to target certain aspects of it to move around and adjust completely as the animation goes on. It has been a really useful tool, and I've used it multiple times in the in my final animation to get the shots I want and be able to really get key smooth movements from the camera without causing any lag spikes or just random cuts through certain scenes. So which has been a perfect addition to making this a very good project, and hasn't cost me any more time rendering or any extra involvement or file sizes. Looking back at all the tools and softwares I've used for this project, I can definitely say I've used a wide variety. I started off with using Photoshop for my character and block out art for my environment as well. I use 3ds Max for my initial blockouts. I use ZBrush for making high poly character for it. I've used Maya for creating all of my assets, my retopology, doing the reanimation. I've used myself from going and doing my very own mocap data for the character, so that's something that I haven't mentioned before. All the animations you've seen in this project have all been done by me in a mocap suit. Using Shogun Post to export all the correct data out was an interesting challenge, but quite a fun one to do. Using Motion Builder was interesting, getting to see a new side of the field I haven't actually had the opportunity to work on yet. Really getting to see everything work through, adjusting the files, everything was quite an interesting topic. And in retrospect, I can definitely say I've learned a lot, and I definitely would use certain tools differently next time. Case in point, I probably wouldn't use 3ds Max for my block out next time I would do something like this. The reason I originally used it in the first place was because I felt more comfortable with Max. That was my primary reason for using it, as I had never really used Maya before, or to only a very little degree before this module. And I wanted to make sure I could confidently get the block out done quick enough that I wouldn't get caught up in it with it all. But after using Maya so much for this module, and if in my own personal time as well, I have found that it is overall just a better software for the kind of work I like to be doing. Whilst in 3ds Max I'm very limited in I feel what I can do, although making a general block out or low poly object is still certainly better to do in Max than it is Maya. For making anything more technical or anything of higher quality, is definitely Maya would be the way to go. Nothing inherently wrong about Max, I just personally feel that Maya has more potential and more tools and softwares that I can use to my ability, whether like be the entire rigging section up here, the entire animation paths, UV editing, sculpt, even has its own little version of sculpting tool which is getting better with every update. It's definitely something I'm going to look into more and definitely do more with. The alternative to Maya and ZBrush as well, which we'll get to in a moment, would be Blender, as it is a free software, so it's very accessible for everyone to use, myself included, and there are hundreds of videos online for people showing the different unique ways and amazing potential Blender has, as it's constantly being improved by its audience. And because of it has made hard and soft modeling features in both of them. But I personally still prefer Maya, as similar reasons for why I preferred Max originally. I do not have a lot of experience in Blender, so it's something I have to look more into and really decide which software would be the best one for me to prioritize more in the future. ZBrush is very challenging to talk about. It's an amazing tool. It has a lot of really useful ways of working it. However, it is insanely difficult to pick up for beginners. I found myself spending literally weeks, maybe even a month or two, struggling with finding out what the hell to do in ZBrush, as the user interface to begin with is so convoluted. There's no real support in place for beginners. Case in point, like, it took me a while to find out that all the different types of brushes you could use in ZBrush, because there's no true indicator of what it can do, as well as the just general layout with it, like the layout of it having the file in the almost middle of the screen, when universally across all other softwares it is in the top left. It really threw me through a loop, and I found it quite challenging to get out of old habits from every other software I've ever used in my entire life. But once I was able to get past the learning curve of ZBrush, and it's very unfriendly designed to new users, once I was able to get past all that and start to get my bearings, it was incredibly useful. It's an amazing bit of tool with many tools and abilities and presets to use, and was really helpful with me getting the ball, once I understood what I was doing, getting the ball rolling and getting up to speed really quickly. It's definitely a tool to consider, as well as it's but the main issue with it is everything is hidden behind something. If you don't have a clue what you're doing, you're not going to find anything, and that's the big problem with ZBrush. That's why lots more industry people, and those especially in the indie atmosphere, are abandoning using ZBrush and going into solely using Blender, because Blender is much more user friendly, extremely so, and is very easy to pick up, as well as it being free, so they can especially indie developers can save their money on having to purchase a license for ZBrush when they can get a free license for Blender and be able to do things to a very similar degree, if not same standards as ZBrush. So it's something to really look at and decide which tool is better and which tool can use for certain situations. From this, Unreal Engine has certainly been the most fun tool to use. I love doing my hard modelling, and so Maya and Max have been great fun, but Unreal has certainly been the most interesting one out of all of them for me to use. I haven't really done a lot with Unreal in the past, but the ability in the tools it has available, especially in this 5.4 update, have been fantastic. I was able to create this entire landscape around me within less than a day, as well as being able to use speed trees and randomly generate my own specific tree seed, and be able to import that in seamlessly with a built-in adapter to Unreal, and be able to really litter my design around with foliage all being slightly different and different from angles to the tree lengths and leaf structure, even the amount of times it flexes in the wind. That was a mixture of both C-Tree and Unreal's built-in engine abilities, and it's been really amazing. Everything I was able to quickly pick up, and if I had any troubles or anything, it was nothing a quick search on forums couldn't solve. And it was been great fun getting to create a set in Unreal and really get to design it however I want and make little alterations to it with the engine's capacity, and get to see the changes in real-time rendering as well, which has been fantastic to really make sure I'm getting the most out of my project and really deciding that which path or way I want to go with the project, which has been spectacular. The only kind of downside I can see to Unreal is to really get the most out of it, to use it to its fullest. You need to have a understanding of coding, or the very least blueprint coding, which is something I struggle with myself with the coding aspect in general. I got the majority of my feedback quite early on in my production stage. However, it was still really useful and it really did change how I was doing a lot of my work. I mentioned one or two small bits already, with things such as my character's height being unproportioned, not being proportioned properly. So I was able to change that in ZBrush by extending the legs and adjusting the feet. I was able to make sure that the top half of the body and the lower half of the body was properly designed. Other things you can see here from my fellow classmates are things like from concept art, need to make sure the clothing represents the time period / style. So that was really helped me be able to kind of, especially with the blood that I was doing on the character, make sure that it was the right type. It wasn't going to be too shiny. Make sure it kind of fit with like the timeline that I had set for the character, as well as making sure that the clothing for the character was the right type of material. Like, you wouldn't want someone who's supposed to be in standard commoners' clothes, you wouldn't want them to be dressed up like they were a centre of royalty. Then you had to make sure that the clothes were low textures with simple cotton weavings and stuff like that. So yeah, you can see, like, thanks to the feedback I got, that I was able to adjust the clothing so that it would be quite leathery, quite cotton, like plain cotton clothing. So I was able to really make it so the textures fitted the type of character I wanted Psycho here to be. On top of that, I was able to focus on where the topology would rest, which, as mentioned before, was quite a challenge for a lot of it. The big bit of feedback I got was that my mocap data was really good and really was able to, even without having a face finished at the time of the original feedback for it, from the animations alone and the skeleton, people could tell that this character had emotion behind it. He was walking with pride. He was full of himself. He was smug. It was exactly what I wanted to convey with the character, and the fact that people were able to see that with just my skeleton and my original mocap data was fantastic. Be able to see that I had already been able to portray that in the exact way I wanted it to, and was able just to push forward with it even further to really get the effect for it. Also, it all came together really nicely. See, like the ideal one here was the overall proportion was how they need to elongate the back and front a little forward for the neck. So I was able to reposition everything in ZBrush and make sure the character looked fine. As well as a big one that really changed it was that there was no muscle definition where the skin was showing. I had originally just had it be just a simple like noodle arm, so I was able to go back into ZBrush with this and really add more detail to find it, make my character have muscle lines over the scales and everything, so it really came through that it wasn't just one thin thing. You're able to see that he has proper joint muscles, indents and flexes out where where the muscles in the arm were. I was able to get some really useful referencing for that, which you can again find on the hard drive. From there, my environment feedback was quite helpful in a lot of ways, as making sure that my building was spaced out enough for the animation to take place. I was originally having everything too cramped into a corner because I wanted to make sure the buildings were affected to it, but I then had this massive space left over, so I was really able to, thanks to that, be able to proportion things more, because originally all of these buildings you see here, these three along the side here, these were all super cramped together with about half an inch difference, so I had to make sure that I could then, thanks to the feedback, go back, watch the animation through slowly and see if there was any clipping of the models or anything. So being able to tell whether or not the character could realistically fit in the little alleyway here, whether or not he could actually swing a sword around without clipping into any buildings. And I'm glad to say that thanks to the feedback that I was able to adjust it so that Psycho here can swing a sword without clipping into any buildings or causing a collision effect to break the whole animation. As well, from there, we've been able to get feedback that from the original blueprint layouts I had for it, the town was too realistically small for my grayscale grandeur. As I originally showed, I had taken inspiration from an old video game series I watched, I love to play myself, called the Fable series, or more likely Fable 2, and just the general size of the town was too small for what I wanted, from what my inspiration was from, because I was taking lots of inspiration from this video game and from the Dungeons and Dragons movie that had recently come out, as those are my big inspirations, and the materials they were used were too grand, too open, too out there, too rich, as it were, to be used in the small town that I had created. So I was able to take that and go back to the drawing boards and create a different material that was more dirt and gravel with little pebbles scattered around it to create the effects I wanted, so it would still have that almost stone look, but it would be more inclined and more in tone with the rest of the surrounding areas and the town itself. So the feedback I was able to get has been extraordinarily helpful, and it has really helped shape the overall view of my project and make sure that I was making it realistic and improving the overall effects that everyone was going to experience by watching this, by taking the feedback to heart and adjusting it to make it so it would work properly. Looking back and reflecting at everything I've done for this year with Caspar, I can definitely say I have learnt a lot. I have learned a lot about my skills and about myself personally. I can definitely say for certain that I am stronger with doing this module than I would have been without it. I've learnt a lot that I will use for hundreds of projects to come. But more than that, on a personal level as well, I have learnt more about how I work. I am a perfectionist, very much so. I have realised doing this, I get really fixated on one certain project or one certain point that I start to lose focus on everything else. A key thing for this has definitely been my my mocap stuff, for example. I got so fixated on making sure that my actual cuts were perfect and that I knew exactly what I wanted to do with my mocap that I didn't actually have a character ready by the time it was my time to do mocap, so I had to work with the base model and go from there. It wasn't a problem in the end, but it really showed that I need to learn more on letting go of my perfectionism, because it seemed I tend to find that it picked up more when I was struggling with something. If I wasn't confident with something like the ZBrush or the retopology, I was spending 2, 3, 4, maybe even 5 times longer on it than I should have done on my other projects or on my other parts of it. Like, for example, like you can see on the retopology file, like I have tons and tons, nearly 100 increments of the retopology, because I was just so uncertain of what I was doing. I was taking so long on it to make sure I got it just right, because I was terrified of doing something wrong with the retopology that it was going to screw up the rest of the project, and I couldn't stop myself from just saying it's at a good level, move on to something else. It was so much more that, no, this is not done, it can be better, you can make it better, you can make this model look more realistic, you can make the animations more smoother, you can add more textures to it, you can add more details to everything, and I just couldn't stop myself from continuing onwards. And it's something that I need to come to terms with, as well as my time management skills, which go coincide that with my perfectionist as my artistic perfection, I was completely throwing myself off schedule. I was taking months on certain things when it should have only taken me 2 weeks, and vice versa. I was rushing because of my losing time. I was rushing through certain things which I should have taken my time to really flesh out, and I probably wouldn't have had as many problems if I wasn't so panicked about my time. I probably wouldn't have had the invisible faces and vertexes with the longsword and the housing that cost me more time and had to really find a solution for. If I had taken my time with it and really let it work in a casual pace that I was comfortable with, I wouldn't have been in the situation where I was struggling to come up with an answer for certain things and having to rely on help from others to get through. But that's something as well. I need to learn to accept help when I need it. It's something I struggle with. I didn't want to disturb people. I didn't want to, if I couldn't do something, I didn't want to be the one to have to go and get help from someone. I wanted to be able to try and figure it out myself, which is good. It's good that I tried to find the solution myself, and it's very good that I was able to use the knowledge that I had taken from previous problems and find a solution much faster than I would have done elsewhere. However, I need to make sure that I don't hinder myself with this problem as well. I need to be able to look at a problem and be able to say right away, oh, the skin weighting's gone wrong on the head. I need to be able to then go back and be able to adjust it quickly, smoothly, without causing myself to be paranoid of, oh, it's something's not working, I can't get the help, I'll just struggle in silence. I need to learn more about speaking out and getting help. And by the end of the project, I was really going with that. I was being able to go talk to people, find out what they had done differently to me, try diff their methods to see if it worked, and then be able to return the favour later on, which has been a really good process for me. So yeah, I've talked a lot about my weaknesses there, haven't I? The strengths of it was that I am resilient. I do not just stop when I'm struggling with something. I learned that even if I'm hitting a brick wall, I can persevere. I can find a way through it. I won't stop just because something is difficult. I will find a way to go through the solution, find an example of what I need to do, and perfect it. It's something like here with the with my extra shots, I was struggling with getting some of the certain cameras through, and then I remembered what I did previously with the railing, and was able to reincorporate some of my previous assets to shot in the sun, be able to show people what I'd done, and it has been really useful for stuff like that. I've definitely learned as well that I need to know my limits and scope as a single artist. Like I mentioned before, I had a great vision. If nothing else from this, I've learned that I'm a really big visionary, and I planned and thought of this entire great landscape of this roaring fantasy town, the likes of a Skyrim or the city in Cyberpunk, and would plan the whole fruition, an entire backstory for the character, how he got cursed, what he was like, why is he murdered everyone. And I thought of all of this and how to implement it into a story and create the great big grandeur of an entire city, and then quickly realise that as much as I would love this idea and I want to do this idea, I do not have the time for it. So I was really being able to take this and learn that it's fine to have these grand ideas, but learn to take those grand ideas, and instead of trying to make this entire like up here in the top right, instead of trying to make an entire castle, an entire city, think smaller and make the courtyard. Start in one place and then proceed outwards from there, and that's something that I've definitely need to work more on, is that I have these great ideas, to toot my own horn, that really can push the boundary of what's possible, but I need to look at it and then recently go, okay, it's fine with this idea, but can I do this in the time frame? And it's something I've learned and I've been able to adapt to towards the midway point of the project, and it's something that I will take with me further on for the future projects and for everything else that is to come in my career as an artist. I've also been able to learn and adjust to what I want to do. I thought solely that I just wanted to be a prop artist, be able to make weapons, vehicles, stuff like, and small little things like that. But doing all this, I found I really enjoy making environments as well. and it's definitely something I'm going to look into and try more in the future, because creating the environment for my project, being able to really design the buildings and everything, has been really enjoyable, and I want to do more of it. I want to try making more convoluted buildings, perhaps come back to redoing the scene and adding a church in there, or like a big grand stone cathedral of sorts, similar to Canterbury Cathedral in Kent, which I went to, and that's why I got some inspiration for my colouring and my tone for the buildings and such. So it's definitely something that I've enjoyed and I want to do more of thanks to this, and it's something that's definitely going to help push me forward and improve my skills for future as well. And that includes my presentation for Psycho, aka Caspar. Thank you all so much for listening. If you wish to see any of the files that I've shown you today and the many more, there is a link to it all on my PowerPoint slide here in the Google Drive. Please feel free to answer. If there's any problems, please reach out. I'll be happy to answer them. And thank you very much for listening. And I hope you've enjoyed. Thank you very much. Good night.